Angola, the southwestern African gateway to the Atlantic Ocean, rich in diamond mines and surrounded by boundless forests and savannas, had been home to deeply rooted indigenous kingdoms for centuries. However, with Portuguese explorers reaching its shores in the late 15th century, these lands became the stage for one of the longest and most ruthless colonial pasts in human history. This was a painful epic of freedom written through guerrilla warfare following over 2.5 centuries of slave trade, only to be plunged into a massive civil war upon gaining independence. When Portuguese ships led by Diogo Cão reached the mouth of the Congo River in 1482, Angola's fate was sealed. The Portuguese initially established friendly trade relations with the Ndongo and Congo kingdoms, but this relationship soon turned into a brutal slave trade. Angola became one of the primary hubs of the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Angolans were shackled and shipped off as slaves to plantations in Brazil and the Americas. The country's human capital was systematically depleted. In the 17th century, one of the greatest resistances in African history against Portuguese colonialism was launched by Queen Nzinga Mbande of Ndongo and Matamba. Queen Nzinga challenged Portuguese armies for years with her military genius and diplomatic acumen. By uniting indigenous tribes, she prevented the Portuguese from advancing into the interior. Fighting for her people's freedom throughout her life, Nzinga became an immortal symbol of African resistance, refusing to bow to colonialism. Following Queen Nzinga's death, Portugal steadily increased its control over Angola. By the 20th century, Angola was declared an official overseas province of Portugal. The Portuguese dictatorship, Estado Novo, uprooted Angolans from their lands to work them to death on cotton and coffee plantations. Deprived of education, healthcare, and basic human rights, the native population was forced to live as aliens in their own homeland. Centuries of silence were shattered on February 4, 1961, with an armed raid on prisons in Luanda. Launched under the vanguard of the MPLA, Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, this attack ignited the Angolan War of Independence. Portugal's fascist regime launched a brutal military campaign on the island to crush this uprising. Villages were bombed, napalm was deployed, and thousands of civilians were massacred. Angola's independence struggle could not be waged under a single umbrella. Different ideological and tribal-based movements such as the MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA fought both the Portuguese and each other for leadership. The bloody guerrilla war waged for years in the country's mountains and forests exhausted the Portuguese economy and military. The Carnation Revolution in Portugal in 1974 brought the decision to end colonial wars. On November 11, 1975, the Portuguese administration officially declared its withdrawal from Angola, yet the joy of the people was short-lived. Disputing who would take power, a massive civil war broke out between the MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA. The major powers of the Cold War, the Soviet Union, Cuba, the US, and South Africa, provided arms and troop support to opposing sides, turning Angola into a global proxy war arena. Angola's independence unfortunately failed to bring peace. Decades of civil war completely destroyed the country's infrastructure, displaced millions of people, and littered the land with landmines. The nation's rich petroleum and diamond resources were squandered to finance the war. The price of freedom turned out to be a devastating ruin, costing hundreds of thousands of lives. Portugal's centuries-long colonial presence had ended militarily in 1975, but the wounds of the country took a long time to heal. With the end of the Civil War in 2002, Angola finally stepped into stability and a process of reconstruction. Today, Angola is a proud country looking to the future with its rich natural resources, leaving behind the pains and destructions of the past. The streets brim with the euphoria of peace and rebirth. The story of Angola showed how a country emerging from half a century of exploitation struggled to survive despite the pains of civil war. But what dramatic story awaits us when we journey to the Far East, to that ancient peninsula crushed under the iron fist of the Japanese Empire, Korea. In our next video, we will witness Korea's painful years of occupation and resistance. Stay tuned.